As of February 2022, a Dutch open-source military information website called Oryx says that Russia has lost 3,388 tanks in Ukraine. Out of the reported tank losses, 2,332 are destroyed beyond repair, 157 have been damaged, 367 have been left behind, and 532 have been taken by Ukrainian troops. War Spotting, a website in the UK that keeps track of proven war losses, says that Russia has lost 2,995 tanks. This information is based on satellite photos. These big tank losses are a bad sign for Russian President Vladimir Putin's war strategy because they show that his plan to use more people and heavier equipment on the ground has turned into a meat grinder that is slowly but surely using up Russia's own supplies. Russia keeps losing tanks in certain areas of Ukraine. Maps and satellite pictures of damaged tanks show where these losses are happening. A place called Trostyanets, which is close to the border between Ukraine and Russia, was very important in the first Russian attack. The city was one of the first to be hit hard by Russia's tank attacks, which shouldn't be a surprise since it's close to the border between Russia and Ukraine. On the second day of the war, Russia's 4th Guards Tank Division got within 20 miles of the line. Ukrainian fighters put up a strong fight against the special unit. They tried to stop the Russian tank unit from moving through the city and further southwest on their way to Kyiv. In March 2022, Military posted pictures of more Russian tanks that had been destroyed in the Sumy area. The pictures showed 3 BMP-2s, a T-80U, and a T-80BV. In other pictures, military trucks were damaged, and there were a few Russian camps outside of the city. After an attack on Trostyanets a year ago, Ukraine was able to take back the city, and more pictures of the tanks they burned in the city started to surface. Images shared by Livulat make it clear that Russian tanks were destroyed, and War Spotting confirms that 15 tanks were lost. Among these losses are different types of the T-80 and T-72, which were the main weapons Russia used in its early attacks on Ukraine. Ukraine struck the column and tried to destroy the trucks in the lead and the ones following behind them so that Russia couldn't move deeper into Brovary and the column couldn't get away. The first strategy was the only one that worked, which led to heavy fighting in the neighborhood as Russia's tanks tried to get away. Around 40 Russian tanks, mostly T-72s and other types, were damaged or killed in the fight of Brovary in Ukraine. It was a major fight. Russia learned early on from this fight that taking over Ukraine would not be as easy as it thought. Ukraine was able to take back several towns in Brovary, which showed how important it is to protect against tank-based attacks. Another early target of Russia's tank attacks was Avdiivka, but Ukraine fought back. Reuters posted a picture in May 2022 of the burned-out shell of a Russian tank next to a field. It turned out to be a T-80U tank. Along with 3 other tanks, this one was destroyed in the area. The BBC reported in May 2022 that a Russian soldier called Vadim Shishimarin had been caught in the area. He was the first Russian to be found guilty of a war crime during the fight. This event made it clear that Russia was using very young soldiers as leaders of big trucks to attack Ukraine. Because they were young and hadn't been in a war before, these young people helped Ukraine beat Russian tanks so easily in the beginning. In March 2022, the Sumy Oblast was one of the first areas of Ukraine to almost completely be controlled by Russia. Russian troops attacked cities in Ukraine during the Battle of Sumy, where Ukrainian land defense forces and paratroopers fought together. A Russian tank column was destroyed in the early battle, and Ukraine's paratroopers were told to leave Sumy. This left it in the hands of a few thousand local volunteers who only had guns and a few anti-tank weapons. Even with these strategies, the city was successfully held, and the governor of Sumy Oblast, Dmytro Shyvitsky, confirmed that Russian troops were no longer in any of the towns or villages in the area. Putin's attack of Ukraine with Sumy failed, as did many of his other invasions in the first few months of the war. Russia had about 67 T-90 MS in use when it attacked Ukraine, and it could have built another 40 a month before the invasion. In other words, Russia has lost almost all of the T-90 it had when it invaded Ukraine, as well as many of the ones it has made in the months since. Because of the sanctions against Russia after the war, the production of the T-90M will have also slowed down. This is probably a big reason why Putin is still depending so much on tanks from the Soviet era. Putin's main goal during his first attack of Ukraine was clearly the invasion of Kyiv. Early war maps from the BBC show how close Russia was to taking the city. By March 2022, Putin's troops had set up areas around Kyiv that they controlled somewhat. But by November of that year, Russia's troops were no longer in the northeastern areas near Kyiv. This meant that Putin's plan to take Ukraine's city failed horribly. Space.com released pictures from space that clearly show how Putin planned to take the city. Tanks and other armed vehicles are part of a 40-mile route that goes from Pribyrsk to the Antonov International Airport, which is only 6.2 miles from Kyiv. The fight at that airport was very important in the war, and Ukraine won it in the end. But it was the truck that showed how bad Putin's tank-based plan could be. Ukraine did things like hit the front and back of the truck to stop it from moving forward and to stop it from getting away. In that case, Ukraine didn't fully win. The head of the column was destroyed, but the tail was still there, so Russia was able to pull its tanks back and make a second attack that started a bigger fight. The strategy worked much better against the Kyiv truck. War Spotting says that 83 Russian tanks have been destroyed in or near Kyiv. It's likely that many more have been destroyed or crippled without being reported. The pictures from War Spotting show a number of T-80s and T-72s that are in wrecks. The T-72s seem to make up most of the pictures. The pictures are also interesting because they don't show any T-90s. This makes people wonder why Putin wouldn't try to take Ukraine's city with the best tank in the world. During the Ukraine war, Russia has had many wins, but they have cost a lot in lives, tanks, and other weapons. Russia took over the city of Kherson in the south of Ukraine on March 1, 2022, and put up to 35,000 forces there. The BBC showed that Russia had full control by the end of March 2022, but by November 2022, Ukraine had taken back most of the city. The city is still in danger, though, because it is close to Mariupol and other parts of South Ukraine that are still controlled by Russia. Forbes released a picture of a T-90 tank from Russia's 17th Tank Regiment in January 2024. The tank was not there to take part in a new attack on the city. Rather, Ukraine said that the 17th Tank Regiment is now in charge of getting back the many vehicles the Russians lost while they failed to get the Marines out of Kherson. War Spotting has proof of 208 tanks that were destroyed or damaged in the Kherson Oblast, which shows how many were lost. In these pictures, there are more tanks than in the other places we've looked at so far. Kharkiv was the site of a long fight in which Russia lost hundreds of tanks but didn't win any ground. Putin's main military goal in the early stages of the war was Kharkiv, which is only 19 miles south of the northern border between Ukraine and Russia. In February 2024, 20,000 Russian forces meet in Belgorod, which is just north of that line. They are supposed to take over Kharkiv within 2 days. That didn't happen, though. Instead, Russia tried to move forward, but Ukraine pushed back. To try to take the city, Russia had to use weapons and tanks to support its attacks. Russia tried to circle Kharkiv, but by May 2022, Ukraine had beaten them back and started a counter-offensive that pushed Russia out of the country completely. Since then, there has been constant fighting in the Kharkiv area, with a lot of it involving Russian tanks. Newsweek released a map in July 2024 that seemed to show that the war was shifting in Ukraine's favor. It showed that Ukraine had defended a 15.5-mile area around the city while Russia tried to move from the northeast. The same month, the New Voice of Ukraine released numbers showing that the most recent Russian attempt to take Kharkiv had failed horribly, with 2,936 Russian troops dying and 6,509 being hurt in battle. Concerning tanks, they are all over Kharkiv. In July 2022, Putin's main goal was to take over the Donbas area, especially the strong city of Bakhmut. It took Russia almost a year to make its move, and they still have power over Bakhmut. However, Russia lost a huge number of soldiers and tanks along the way. The BBC said in March 2023 that Putin had lost up to 30,000 men, including tanks, while trying to protect the city. Ukraine said on May 1 that Russia had sent 25,600 men, 65 tanks, and 450 armed vehicles to the last part of the fight. No one knows for sure how many tanks Russia lost in the end. Fights haven't stopped near Bakhmut, even though Russia rules the city. According to a story in Newsweek from October 2023, Russia lost 6 tanks in just 24 hours in a single fight in Bakhmut. It was reported by War Spotting that at least 185 Russian tanks have been lost or destroyed near Bakhmut. Several T-90s have been captured with major damage while carrying coke cages. Putin didn't win in Bakhmut by having the smartest plan. He won by killing tens of thousands of Russian forces and losing hundreds of tanks in the process. It was October 2023 when Russia began a full-scale attack on Avdiivka. Its strategies were very similar to those used in Bakhmut. The attack lasted for about 4 months, and Russia finally took control of the city and the towns nearby in February 2024. Some, like Forbes and Newsweek, have said, though, that the win in Avdiivka was really just a hollow gain. Forbes said that Russia lost 214 tanks from early October 2023 to February 2024. Most of these tanks were T-72s and T-80s that had been used in other parts of the war. Reports from Ukraine's troops that were published by Newsweek in February 2024 added to these numbers. Russia has relied on tanks in all of its big battles against Ukraine, which has led to the terrible loss of over 3,000 proven tanks and thousands more that haven't been photographed. Satellite pictures of a secret Russian military storage facility in Siberia show that most of the tanks there are already gone. This is the case at almost all of the storage facilities Moscow controls. Because of this, Dmitry Medvedev, the former president of Russia, said that Russia planned to make 1,500 tanks a year by March 2023. Satellite pictures that were analyzed by AI showed that Russia has lost about half of the tanks it had stored before the war. Putin has used a huge number of Russian tanks to put pressure on Ukraine since February 2022. Russia, on the other hand, loses hundreds of tanks every time it wins land. It's running out now, even though they are trying to make more of it. Putin needs to answer a tough question: what will he do in a future war with Ukraine when he doesn't have thousands of tanks to use?